Hi and welcome to this tutorial. We have looked at different JDBC templates in our previous tutorials, and we have seen how using a JDBC template can simplify our DAO classes. Before we wind up Spring JDBC support, there's one other concept that I would like to talk about, and that is DAO support classes. Now, the implementation that we have done here using the JDBC template has actually reduced a lot of lines of code. But then if you see here, there are a few lines of code that need to be added for all your DAO classes. Of course, here I have multiple JDBC templates. You wouldn't have that normally. You would just have one JDBC template, but then you would need to have a data source. You would need to have these lines of code over here. What this does is on the setter of the data source, I'm initializing the JDBC template. I'm saying new JDBC template and I'm passing the data source to it. So these lines of code have to be there for all your DAO classes. Well, in this project, I just have one, so it's not such a big deal. But let's say you have a project where you have 10 DAO classes, 20 DAO classes. That means that these lines of code would have to repeat for each of those 20 DAO classes. So this is again something that can be optimized. As we all know, in order to be a good programmer, you have to think lazy. So let's see how we can get a little bit more lazier and see how we can optimize even these lines of code. Now think about this. I have 10 classes or 20 classes with the same lines of code. One simple way to eliminate these repeating lines of code is to have one common parent class that has these lines of code, and then all my other 10 or 20 classes will inherit it from that. So what we are looking at here is having one common DAO class. We call it the generic DAO, and that generic DAO will have this member variable. It'll have these getters and setters. So these lines of code will be in that generic DAO. And then in my project, all my other DAO classes will extend that generic DAO. Well, this is actually a common practice, and in a lot of enterprise applications you would have all your DAOs extending one common DAO anyway. And Spring also recommends this. Spring advises us to isolate all these features out and put it into a common DAO, and your DAO classes extend that. And what Spring has actually done is, in the framework, Spring has a support class that does this very thing. Now Spring has a support class with these member variables and with these getters and setters, because this is something that you would most of the times you would end up doing, because your DAO class would need to have a data source anyway. It would need to have a JDBC template anyway, and you'd have to assign it. And this is something that you would do 99% of the time in your DAO classes. So Spring says, hey, let me provide you a class. You don't even have to write that DAO class, the generic DAO class. I will provide you the generic DAO class. All you need to do is your DAO class has to extend the generic DAO. So in that case, you can actually do away with all these lines of code. Now, the question is, there are three different JDBC templates over here. I have the JDBC template, I have the name parameter JDBC template, and I have the simple JDBC template. Now, which template does that support class actually contain? Well, there are three different DAO support classes. So you have the JDBC DAO support, which has a JDBC template. You have the name parameter DAO support, which has a name parameter JDBC template. And we have a simple DAO support, which has a simple JDBC template. And then again, that DAO support class doesn't really do anything. It just has these lines of code. That's it. So your code does not need to have this. It's as simple as that, but it's a good design practice. And this is something that you would normally use. So let's have a look at how we can do that. So the first step is deciding what JDBC template you need. I have gone through the JDBC template and the name parameter JDBC template in the previous tutorials. In this tutorial, I'm going to use the simple JDBC template. So now when I'm creating a new DAO class that uses the DAO support, I would have to get the right DAO support class depending on the template that I need. Now, if I want to write a DAO that uses simple JDBC template, I would have to extend the simple JDBC DAO support. It's as simple as that. So each of these templates have a corresponding DAO support class. So in this tutorial, I'm going to choose the simple JDBC template. So I'm going to write a DAO class that extends the simple JDBC DAO support. So I'm going to create a new class, and I will call this simple JDBC DAO MPL. And now this class will extend the simple JDBC DAO support. So I'm going to click browse here. Simple JDBC DAO support. You see, this is here. You also have the others. So I can choose JDBC DAO support. So this is the one which has the JDBC template, and of course there's one for named parameters as well. See here, name parameter JDBC DAO support. So for this example, I'm going to choose simple JDBC DAO support, and then click finish. So there are no abstract methods, so you don't have to implement anything. All you need to do is know that this class, the class that we are extending, has the simple JDBC template as a member variable. So you don't need to define it. You don't need to initialize it with the data source. You don't need to have any of that. All you need to do is, whenever you're writing your DAO method, whenever you need to access the simple JDBC template, all you need to do is use this getter here, get simple JDBC template. So this is something that our class inherits from the simple JDBC DAO support. So we have a fully initialized JDBC template with us, and we just use the getter in order to get the JDBC template. Now the question is, how does the JDBC template know where the data source is? Because that is something that we've been doing over here. We have been initializing the JDBC template with the right data source. So we'll have a look at that in just a minute, but let's quickly implement one of the methods that we have already implemented over here. Let's take this one, get the circle count. I'm just going to copy this and paste this method here. So this is a method that gets the count of records from the circle table. So I have a select count of star from circle, and then I'm using the JDBC template dot query for int method and passing the SQL, and I'm returning the count. Now this JDBC template was a member variable in the previous class, and I accessed it directly, but here, as we discussed just now, I'll be using a getter. So I'll do a this dot get JDBC template dot query for int. So this is a method that's run on the JDBC template member variable that we are inheriting from the simple JDBC DAO support. And guess what? This is it. This is all that your DAO has to do. So none of the initialization code will be there in each of your individual DAOs. It will just be just this line of code which runs the corresponding method on the JDBC template and then return the value, and you're done. So let's save this. And now let's look at how this JDBC template actually gets initialized. So here we have a data source, and then we are passing the data source value using the Spring XML. Right? We have the data source being defined over here, and then we are passing this data source, a fully initialized data source object, to the JDBC template, to this class, using this auto-wired annotation. So I'm auto-wiring the data source directly to my data source member variable over here. So now how do I do that in this DAO class? Note that here I do not have access to the source for the member variables or the setters. The member variable and the setters are happening in the parent class in the simple JDBC DAO support. So I cannot go and auto-wire the code in this class. I cannot write an auto-wired annotation for the setter since that is in this class. However, I can still use the member variables. When I say I cannot control the annotations, that's because the source code is over here. But still, the member variables of this class are the member variables of this class. So since I have the JDBC template and the data source over here, I can always access them using the getters and setters because I'm inheriting them from the parent class. So the obvious way is to use Spring XML. So what I do here is I define this DAO as a bean in the Spring XML, and then I assign the data source to the member variable of this simple DAO JDBC IMPL. So let me do that here. So I define a bean simple JDBC DAO IMPO. And the class is my new DAO class that I have over here. So now I have defined that as a bean. Now what I can do is I can dependency inject any data source I want into the data source member variable of this class. Since it's extending this class, the member variables of this class will also be inherited. Now I can dependency inject into that. So it is as simple as having a property here like this. So I have a property data source referring to the data source bean that I have already defined over here. So what's going to happen is this will ask Spring to do the dependency injection. So this data source reference will get injected to the data source over here. And this data source is a member variable of my DAO class. So my DAO and of course the JDBC template will be aware of the data source. So again, it's nothing different from what we're doing over here. So here we are using an auto-wired because we have the source code here and we can annotate it. But here, since we are extending it from a parent class and we do not have the source code, what we do is we use the Spring XML in order to define this. So let me save this. And of course, it's actually a good idea to have this definition in the XML because this is something that you might want to change. Well, for example, depending on the environment that you are in, you might want to point to a different database, use different data sources. So it's definitely a configuration rather than the way the program works or the functionality. So it's actually a good idea to put this configuration in the XML anyway. So now that I have passed the data source to the JDBC template, or rather to the DAO support class, the simple DAO support class knows what the database is and it has a fully initialized JDBC template. Now I don't have to worry about all the rest of the things. All I do is I use a getter to get the JDBC template and then run the methods on it. So that is it. So now let's test this out. I will run this method get circle count of the simple JDBC DAO. So I'm going to change the code over here. This will be simple JDBC DAO IMPO. And then of course I have to import this. And now I will print out the output of this method, get circle count. Let's save this. And now what's happening is I'm initializing the DAO, which is this one, my new DAO, and I'm calling a get circle count here. Again, the method itself has not changed. Only thing is, instead of using a member variable, I'm doing a getter of a parent class. Now let's make sure this works. And there you go, I get a value of 5, which is the number of records in the circle table. So this is the way in which you can use the DAO support classes that are provided by Spring. This is again not very different from what we've done so far. It is just that it's a better way, and then we're using one of the support classes that Spring provides, and we can do away with all these code that we need to do to initialize our DAOs in case we're using a JDBC template directly.